Hello and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. Today on the show, we're going to dig into something that I think has been pretty frustrating for a lot of people for the entirety of building for the web, which is how do you handle when apps become real world? Any sufficiently complex app is going to have a lot of different places where you've got front end, you've got back end, you've got APIs, you've got databases, you've got external services, and they all have different requirements. They have to cross these different boundaries and interact with each other in a way that feels good. And we have tried so many things as developers to solve these problems. We had MVC and patterns like it. We've had TRPC. We've had serverless. We've had the API boundaries and all these things that sort of drive the experience of how we build for the web. And today we seem to be shifting toward another wave of innovation in this space. We've seen things like HTMX is making its resurgence. We're seeing the React server components paradigm. And we're also seeing new innovation in the space, new people kind of experimenting with different patterns for how we can do that. And that's what I want to dig in today with somebody who I respect as one of the most like forward-thinking people in the JavaScript community. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Rich Harris.
Hi.
What's up, Rich? How you doing?
I'm gonna level you, Jason. I'm exhausted. We have been going full tilt recently on the Svelte team, trying to get stuff ready precisely so that we can show it in context like this. So I was up until 2 a.m. fixing bugs and this, that, and the other. I am very confident that we will find some more on the stream today. In fact, I'll be a little disappointed if we don't. But I'm excited to be here. It's good to see you.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time. I didn't realize I was assigning you quite such a chore when I asked you to be on the show. But I as usual, I am always thrilled to get a chance to talk with you about this stuff because I feel like there are people who approach this like a contest that needs to be won, and there are people who approach this like a fun puzzle that needs to be solved. And I'm always a big fan of people who approach it as the latter. We're all just trying to attempt different ways of fitting these pieces together and seeing which ones feel good for the current era, right? And not worrying about whether or not we're the world's best or the only option or any of those sorts of things. And I've always felt like that's sort of your ethos. Like you don't seem like somebody who's too worried about a winner take all mentality here.
I mean, that's absolutely the case. We're building this thing first and foremost for ourselves. Like we are trying to design the thing that like we feel like is the most elegant solution to the problems that we're facing. At the same time, like we are 100% competitive. Like we are very motivated by, having ideas like put out into the world that then inspire other people to do similar things in their projects. But you're right, it is very much a rising tide lifts all boats situation. And the wonderful thing about the front end community is that people are very open about what they're working on and very keen to share what they're working on.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, like we're all friends and we all want each other to succeed. So yeah, I'm happy that that's how it appears from the outside too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it wouldn't be worth working on if it wasn't worth arguing about, right? Like if it was such a solved problem that we didn't have differing opinions, like why are we reinventing wheels? But I feel like especially in this current state of things, we've seen huge leaps forward in what browsers are capable of. We've seen huge leaps forward in the way that networks work and different approaches to APIs. We had the GraphQL stuff come out. There's TRPC. There's all these real-time things coming out that suddenly make it possible to like feasibly approach real-time in an app. And that's just the stuff I can think of off the top of my head. I feel like the space is moving so fast, and it's leaving some of the old approaches kind of lacking. Like it doesn't quite make sense to make an MVC app anymore because there's more to it than that. Like an M is a quite a big thing when you're thinking about what is your model. Well, is that my real-time model? Is that my third-party SaaS model? Is that my database model? Is it my other database model? Like, you kind of end up with a lot of questions about how do we solve this stuff in a way that feels good to build and that feels good to use. And this is, I think, where my core contention comes in, because right now I feel like we're choosing one or the other with most frameworks. There's either feels good to build and the DX is incredible, but then it's kind of got it's weird. We're shipping a ton of JavaScript to the user. We've got a lot of trade-offs, I would say. Or it's the other way around. We can make this incredible user experience, but as a developer, you feel like you're sort of jumping through a lot of hoops or dodging a lot of sharp edges to get there. How are you, like, I guess from your standpoint, do you feel the same tension, or are you looking at something completely different from what I'm thinking about?
No, I mean, I think that tension definitely exists, although I would maybe draw the trade-offs in a slightly different place. When we're thinking about how to solve some of the problems that you articulated, and you mentioned things like HTMX, there are basically two schools of thought. Web apps are fundamentally distributed systems. You have a server, you have a client, you probably have a CDN serving static assets somewhere in between. And like, means that as a web developer, you spend a lot of time thinking and talking about solving asynchronous problems. And historically, component frameworks haven't been very good at that. And so the people who have, I think, made the most headway in recent years in solving the DX problem have been the people that have said, you know what, we're just going to kind of retreat from this problem. We're going to make this less distributed by doing as much as we can on the server and kind of treating the client as just like a dumb terminal that's just going to receive updates. And so, HTMX is an example of that idea, right? You have all of your logic, all of your state on the server, and then the client is just like fetching snippets of HTML, and then maybe doing a little bit to patch that in a non-destructive way and things like that. And MPA frameworks like Astro are the same basic idea. Like with Astro, obviously you can have client-side logic. There is a place to put that, but it doesn't give you any help with it. Like you're very much on your own at that point. The real value of a framework like that is that all of the stuff is happening in a predictable place on the server where you control it, and you don't need to think about the complexity of building a distributed system. But with all of these approaches, you kind of hit a ceiling on the richness and the fidelity of the experiences that you can create. Because if I have a powerful device in my hand or on my desk, which I do most of the time, I want to put it to use. I want to do as much of the computation there as possible. I don't want to have to go all the way back to the server just to get a tiny bit of updated data, or even in the MPA case, an entirely new page. To me, that model just doesn't make sense. That's something that belongs in the past. But we haven't really done a good job of making it easy and straightforward to build those really high fidelity, rich client-side experiences. And that's what we've been spending the last few months thinking deeply about.
And so when you're talking about that, just to sort of repeat it in my own words and make sure I'm grasping it, you're talking about how if we approach a website as being client-side, which was the default for quite a while up until the last few years, you can do all these things like client-side navigation. You can do little animations. You can do optimistic rendering. You can do, the business logic and filtering can happen on the client side, and all that sort of stuff is fast and it feels good, and you get these little interaction bonuses. But because when you start getting into complex systems, that starts to add a lot of weird things about how do you make sure that things are happening in the right order, avoiding race conditions. Suddenly you're like re-engineering a full server in your client, which leads to a bunch of duplicated code, a lot of complexity, makes it really hard to reason about your app because some of the business logic is in the client, some of the business logic is maybe in the server, and maybe some's in the API. So now you don't even know where to look when something goes weird. That was the problem that I would find at IBM, was we were kind of engineering front ends that were also mini servers that were also sitting on top of back ends that were managed by different teams. And so when something broke in the chain, tracing that issue was really, really hard. And so I think that the solution that you're mentioning is this, let's just pull it all out of the client. Like, this was too hard. We clearly made a mistake. Pull it all back to the server, and clients are just there as like a representation of server state. Am I missing nuance in that?
No, that's exactly it. And it's a really successful approach for certain problems. And the metrics look good when you do this. If you try and eliminate any of the logic from the client and just do everything on the server, then you can really strip down the amount of JavaScript that needs to run in the browser to a bare minimum. And so like your core web vitals are going to look great. But then as soon as you click on a link, there's going to be a delay. Right. And you see this all, and that's not accounted for in the metrics. So we've become an industry that is very metrics focused, and I think people need to give themselves permission to actually use their eyes a little bit and see how the experience of using sites built in different ways differs. And I'm very optimistic in general about technology. I think that the platform is incredible and it's getting better all the time.
Mhm.
And I think if we lean into technological innovation, we can build more impressive and ambitious applications than if we kind of pretend that the innovations of the last decade or so never happened.
Yes, I think that's maybe you're vocalizing a tension that I've felt with some of the advancements in different framework approaches, which has felt very much like go back in time, like it in like a kind of nostalgic way, but in a sort of like this was all a mistake way, which always feels, I don't know, it's like not, it leaves me feeling a little bit like we've given up, right? And we're saying, you know what, this is too hard to solve, it's never going to be solved, let's just walk away from it all and do it the old way. And I respect that tiredness. Like I'm tired. I get it.
We're all tired.
But at the same time, I think that the pushing this medium forward and trying to figure out how we can, how can we fit these things together? Because we've seen it done, right? Like there's teams out there that are shipping these web apps that are lightning fast. They've got great core web vitals. They navigate super quickly, and they're doing it in every single framework out there. So it's possible. We just haven't figured out how to make it the default yet, right? Yeah. And so what I'm really excited about is the exploration that people are doing in how can we make some of these choices that these really talented teams are spending a ton of time and effort getting right. How can we make those a little more baked in? How can we make those a little more automatic? How can we make it so that when a developer who maybe isn't the most experienced dev in the world picks up a framework and says go, they're going to have something that is accessible, that is fast, that has graceful degradation, that is, not going to let them accidentally step into some traps where things like, you get into async await and you're like, wow, this is great, but you don't know how it works and that it's a promise under the hood. And so you accidentally serialize all of them. And now you're making like 15 calls and each has to wait for the one before it. And that's just a thing you learn by getting it wrong, right? Unless we think about our tools and figure out how to be smart about that, right? So it's these little things that I think we can do as I'm saying we, like I do a lot of open source work, but that the open source community is out there approaching that I think can drastically improve everybody's experience of both building for and consuming the web. And so I really do like that it's not everybody just saying, yeah, you know what, let's just give up on client side entirely. It's just there to show us what we did in the back.
Exactly. Like networks aren't always 100% reliable. I live in New York City. I take the subway a lot, and I want ideally for my things to continue working if I'm in a tunnel.
Yeah,
or even if I'm just like leaving my flat, like I go down the stairs and I switch from Wi-Fi to cellular.
Yep.
Like if I lose connection, that's no good.
I know that's
so yeah.
like,
we have supercomputers in our pockets. We should use them.
Absolutely. So in the kind of high level sense, this is the problem that you've been focused on in Svelte for a little while, or one of the problems. So at maybe the 10,000 foot view of how are you actually approaching this? Like what are the choices that you're making inside of the framework that are allowing this to improve? Or is that even the right first question to ask, I guess?
No, it is. I mean, so as an open source maintainer, if you get any traction at all, your issue list will fill up with feature requests of people saying, wouldn't it be great if we could do this? And wouldn't it be great if we could do that? And this thing could be a little bit better. Here's the solution that I propose. And, the temptation is to say, oh yeah, let's do all of these things. But if you take a step back and you start to collect all of these pain points and just kind of let them marinate for a bit, you often find that there's a commonality between them. And that is what we've seen among the Svelte user base. There are a bunch of different overlapping problems that people have encountered while building applications that we think can be solved kind of holistically. And we're taking a layered approach to this. The first is, how do we deal with asynchronicity in components at the most basic level? And this is something that historically components have been really bad at. Like, even though, I said earlier that you spend a lot of time thinking about async as a web developer, like it's a very baked in concept that you have to deal with, and has been even before promises and async await were a thing. Like, since the days of Ajax, you've had to think about this stuff, and we haven't had like a really good unified way to do so. And I think part of that is because the component model kind of predates promises and async await. Like, there wasn't a standard way of thinking about asynchronicity until promises came along. And so we've kind of experimented with different ways of solving this problem. And the first wave of solutions to this was just, I'm going to have some local state in my component, and then I'm going to do a fetch request, maybe inside an effect or something like that. And then when that comes back, I'm going to assign the result to my local variable. But I also have to have some local state indicating whether we're loading and whether there was an error. So there's 3 pieces of state for 1 piece of data. And I have to have that in all of my different components. And if I have multiple components that are all doing asynchronous work simultaneously, they've got their own loading states, their own error states, and there's nothing.
And they're
really
unaware of each other.
They're unaware of each other. There's no coordination. So, that is sadly a very common experience on websites today. Like, when I go to my bank's website, like, spinners all over the place. And that's the fundamental reason, is that all of these things, they're not talking to each other. So that was how we used to solve it back in the day. And then application frameworks came along and said, well, what if instead of the component being responsible for doing this, we take that outside of the component and do it at the level of the router? And so Next has get server-side props. Remix has loaders. SvelteKit has a load function. And the idea there is you can do all of your async stuff in this kind of out-of-band function. And then once that resolves and the framework's finished coordinating it, and maybe it does some other stuff like serializing it into the HTML so that you can hydrate quickly and like this, that, and the other, it will then pass that as props to the components. And that's great, because now you get the coordination. So if you click on a link, things will load before you navigate. You can parallelize requests if you have nested routes like we do in SvelteKit. And that's basically how the problem has been solved for the last few years, is with this idea of loaders. But as we've gone deeper into this world, we've kind of collectively discovered that loaders don't scale. There are some problems with that approach, because you have to fight to get good type safety. We do some magic in SvelteKit so that the props that you receive have the types that were returned from the load function that corresponds to the component. But it's a little bit of magic.
Well, I think like type safety in routers was, I think that was like the problem that kept Tanner Lindsley locked in a basement for like 2 years, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's a hard problem with a lot of different dimensions to it.
Yeah.
But also, if you have multiple pieces of data that your component depends on, like those have to be represented in the same loader. And maybe one of those is out of date and you need to refetch it, but you can't just rerun that part of the function. You have to rerun the entire function. So you're gonna over invalidate. You're gonna fetch more data than you need to when you navigate between pages. There are other problems with it. Like maybe you're building an application and there's just like one small component in the bottom corner of the page that has a dependency on some piece of data. Well, your load function now needs to get that data and kind of drill down through layers of components to get it to where it needs to go. And at every point, like the component receiving it needs to have the type annotations all over again. It's just a real pain. And so if we take a big step back and think, what is the fundamental nature of this problem and how does it correspond to other similar problems that we've solved in the past? The problem is one of co-location. In general, it's better for things to be co-located. Right? We used to think that it's good for your HTML and your CSS and your JavaScript to exist in separate files because they're in different languages. Right? Nowadays, no one really thinks that. Like a few cranks do, but no one really thinks that. We've discovered that is just a bad way to think about the problem. And components are an encapsulation of those 3 concerns.
Right.
That act as these kind of Lego blocks that you can compose together in a really nice way. And it makes sense. That is a mental model that has been very, very successful. Similarly with import declarations, you declare your dependencies using this statically analyzable syntax that lets the person writing the code and the person reading the code, and also the tooling that operates on that code, understand what else we need to have in scope for this component to do its thing. Data is just another example of that. If you can say inside the component, this is the data that I need, like this is the fetch request that is going to get the data that I need to render, then you can sort of start to solve some of these problems. Like you have the type safety and that you need, because the call that gets the data is where that type gets set. If you delete the component, you're no longer going to fetch that data.
Right.
The only problem that we need to solve is the coordination problem. Because again, if my component over here has an asynchronous dependency, and then this component over here has an asynchronous dependency, I don't want those to appear at different times. If I click a link, I want the page to come to me when it's ready. And maybe there's an opt-out, like if I want to show a skeleton UI while a particularly expensive piece of data is being fetched, I can. But in general, we want things to be coordinated. And so the first problem that we set about solving is, how do we do that? How do we do the async dependencies inside components in a way that is coordinated across your application?
Yes, and this actually this reminds me of, in I think 2016 or 2017, when I was getting heavy into GraphQL for IBM. One of the big promises they had was this idea of co-locating your data via GraphQL fragments. So each component would say, this is what I need, this is my fragment, and then it would export that. It would have its layout and everything. Similar idea, like all concerns together. It would export its fragment, and then that sort of did a router thing as well, because all those fragments hoisted up to the router where that query was assembled into one big fetch call, right? And so that solves the problem of co-location. If you get rid of the component, you get rid of the data that it requires. It also solves the problem of deduplication, where if two components need the same data, the fragments dedupe out in the GraphQL query. But it didn't solve the problem of overfetching and over-invalidation, because anytime you change a component, if you had to run that, your GraphQL query had to run in entirety with everything that it was getting. And depending on how you'd set that up, that might be your entire application because of how GraphQL works, right? So when you're approaching this problem, how have you sliced this up to kind of solve these different issues that happen when you start separating data from where it's called from, maybe two components are hitting the same API request with an overlapping set of things they need, but not necessarily exactly the same things? How did you start slicing that up?
So this is the second layer of the problem. The first layer is the first layer is just being able to use promises inside components.
Okay, sure. Yeah. All right. I'm jumping the gun then.
Like that is a syntax problem and a coordination problem and a runtime reactivity problem. And that part is kind of done. We've actually shipped that in Svelte under an experimental flag, and we have some demos that we could walk through if that's helpful. But then the second layer is the stuff that you're talking about. How do we, like, now that we have the ability to consume data from an external source or consume data from our server, how do we make it such that we can get that data without doing the over-invalidation and the overfetching? And how can we cache things intelligently? And how can we make sure all of these things are coordinated? And that is something that we call remote functions. That is a SvelteKit feature, which has been in development for the last couple of months or so, and which we are on the cusp of shipping, again, under an experimental flag.
Sure.
But I think probably tomorrow, maybe next week, we will be shipping this.
Well, so I'm actually pretty excited. Let's look at this step one, because I feel like that alone is a very cool thing to just be able to approach. And since we're going to be showing a screen, let me really quickly do some shout outs here. So first and foremost, we are talking to Rich today. Let me get some banners up and everything. This is the Blue Sky account. If you're not on Blue Sky, where you been, man? Get over there. We are talking about Svelte. I didn't actually pull up the Svelte website. I pulled up a bunch of other stuff. So let me grab just the home Svelte stuff, and we'll drop that in here for anybody who needs a reference. And so you mentioned that step one of this process was solving the ability to use promises inside of components. And And so you sent me a bunch of examples. I've got them in order from 1 to 5 here. Should I hit up this one?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. All right. So looking at this, let me bump the size just a little bit. We're importing something from an API. We've got time. We've got our state. And then out here, we're doing await inside of our components, which this is exciting to me because I don't think I've seen this. I've seen top level await in Astro, and I've seen top level await in some other frameworks, but it's always in kind of like the server setup stuff. I don't think I've ever seen it inside the component model here.
So the one place that you can use await in a client component today outside Svelte is in Vue, but it's only when the component is first created. After that, you're kind of on your own, so it doesn't really solve the problem. I think this is the first framework that has been able to do this, and the reason why is because as a compiler, we get to play fast and loose with the semantics of JavaScript. We keep the syntax, but we vary the semantics to solve the problems that you're trying to solve. And so here, for example, you see 5 separate awaits, which kind of look sequential, but because they're in your template, we know that these are pure expressions. We can run all of these in parallel. So as you're clicking that, if you go over to the API TS file, you can see that multiply API is, if you just drag the divider over to the right a little bit, you'll see that we're defaulting to half a second for each promise. Like this is simulating a slow, unreliable network or whatever. So each of those promises is taking somewhere between 0 and 500 milliseconds.
And we can see too that they all kind of update almost in sequence. Whereas if they were blocking, it would be pop, 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 right? Like it would
exactly. Exactly. So not only do the asynchronous values update simultaneously, and not only are they happening in parallel, but also the synchronous values update, because it would be no good if you click the button and the number on the left updated before the number on the right updated, because then you'd have like 2 times 2 equals 2 and things like that.
Right.
So we have this global coordination of your updates.
I didn't even think about that. That's actually, so that was some magic that I expected to work. And because it just worked, I didn't examine it further. But we're awaiting here, and this is not awaited, but it's not updating until this await finishes. That's really cool, actually. I would have glazed right over that.
Yeah, it's the same if you call an asynchronous function, like normally. It waits until the entire asynchronous function has worked, right? And then you get the result. And so this is kind of like that. If the UI is a function of state, it's now an asynchronous function of state, and you get the UI in one go. And what's really cool is if you uncomment the line at the bottom, just like click on that and then do the command / thing. So now you see that we have some fast updating state. This is updating every millisecond, or every frame rather. And if you can continue to press that button, and it's not going to block those updates because those are independent updates. So the work that begins when you click the button kind of gets put off to one side. And when we update the rest of the screen, we just kind of undo that update to end because that's not ready yet. That tranche of work isn't complete. And then once it's complete, we can then apply that. And so we call this time traveling. We get to have fast updates while slow updates are still ongoing.
And so Charles is asking, and I have the same question. Under the hood, how are you determining that like this affects this but doesn't affect this? Is it just usage of the same reference to state?
It is, but not in the sense of static analysis. It's not looking at the code and saying, oh, this uses N, this uses N, so we're going to group these together. It's all based on runtime dependency tracking. And this is what you get with a signal-based reactivity model. And it's, I don't know how deep we should go into how signals work, but essentially the idea is you have a source and you have an effect, and the effect is a function that runs and will read some sources, one or more sources. And when that happens, the source says, oh, this is now one of my dependents. And so when I change, I'm going to let that effect know that it needs to rerun. And so because you have that ability to track dependencies through the tree of your application, we know exactly which things need to be updated in response to a particular piece of state changing.
Got it. Okay. So this is extremely cool. And yeah, I feel like there's a couple people who want to go real deep here. I am tempted, but I want to avoid going way too deep into the weeds because I feel like we are barely touching the iceberg of what's actually possible here, and what you're actively working on. So okay, so we know that this works. This is extremely cool. We started talking about like the second phase, which is the dependency tracking and deduplication of data across different components and making sure that as we get outside of a single file, right now you're tracking your promises in this one file that's got the time, but then maybe in another one, we've also got a piece of state that's tracking a thing. And then maybe they're both making fetch calls. So now we start getting into the really messy part of like a real app is going to be pulling data from all over the place, and different pieces of data from different API endpoints are going to get pulled into different components. And we have to coordinate all that in a way that doesn't turn into, all right, the only way to do this, which we've historically done, is blow the entire page away and request it all from the server again to get a clean version. So yeah, let's dig into this second layer.
Yeah. All right. How should we go about this? Do you want to rattle through the other playground demos, or do you want to start building a project?
You tell me. I will do whatever you want to do. If you want to show demos, or if you, I could just sit here and pepper you with questions for the rest of our time.
Well, tell you what, why don't we get the demo project up and running, and then I
Sure.
can give you a tour of that, and we can start making some edits to it, and you can ask questions along the way.
All right, sounds good. So let me get this project going. I'm gonna clone this into a repo here. Let's go back to.
So this uses PNPM.
Okay.
And that's how you'll get the correct dependencies. So I would use PNPM install if you have it.
That works out because I've just recently switched to PNPM as my main. Oh, wait, I'm in the wrong thing. Let me, let's see, remote.
So the reason that's important is that we're using the latest versions of most dependencies, but the SvelteKit installation that you have here is from a specific branch. It's being installed from a service called package.pr.new, which allows people to use in development branches directly in their projects without it having to be published to NPM.
I got you. Okay. Let me bump up the size a little bit here. All right. So inside here, we've got our package JSON. We're using Svelte. This is the package.new thing you were talking about. Mm-hmm. And then we have nothing wild, no kind of unexpected adapters in here or packages. And then we've got our source going. So I guess, what do you want to show off on here? Where do we want to start?
Let's get the dev server up and running. So if you open a terminal and do pnpm dev.
Let's jump over here. There we go.
Right. I mean, I've no idea how well this is going to work, or if there's going to be some horrible bugs that are about to rear their heads. But what you're looking at right now is the home page, which in a SvelteKit app is powered by source/roots/pluspage.svelte.
Roots plus page.svelte. Got it.
And actually, if you enable the inspector with Vite plugin Svelte, then you should be able to activate the I'm not sure what the default key combo is.
Let's see. Yeah, I actually don't remember how to do the inspector.
I think if you this is a great question.
I can look it up real quick. Vite plugin Svelte inspector. It knew what I wanted. Oh, do I need to install this?
It should be part of Vite plugin Svelte.
Okay.
Okay. You know what you need to do? Open your Svelte config.js.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let me undo this. There's Svelte.
I have this kind of set up as part of my my bash RC, so I never have to remember to do this. But in here, if you add a new top level option called Veep plugin,
okay, and then is that an array or?
it's an object.
Okay.
And then inside that, do inspector. And you can either just do true, and that'll use the default key combo, or if you want to pick a key combo, I like meta shift S.
And is that you just added in as a?
No, quick create another object, and then toggle key combo. Yeah, I do meta hyphen shift hyphen S.
Shift S, like that.
Yeah,
and
let's
then
try that, see if it works.
Okay, so then if I did that right, what I should be able to do is that meta? What is the meta? Which is the meta?
The command key.
Oh, got it.
Oh, that's just saved the entire page.
Oh, it did the thing. Okay. So so I need to make it something that is not my save button. So let's make it. We'll do
interesting
G.
Or maybe it needs to be lowercase. I'm not actually sure. But that seems to have worked.
Yeah, that did it. So if I hold the
great,
it was doing it when I was hitting the Shift S2, but it was trying to save this page because I think that's I'm using Arc, so I think that's an Arc
I see.
Okay, so if I hold, this is cool. All right, so we've got our inspector going here.
Yeah. So if you just click on an element, it will take you to the.
Cool. Okay. All right. This is slick.
Now, a little caveat here. Because this is still pretty new, we haven't yet implemented asynchronous server-side rendering. So what you're looking at right now is just a client-only single-page app. Normally, that's the sort of thing that I rail against because I'm very pro server-side rendering. It's brilliant for progressive enhancement and accessibility and overall resilience. It means that you get a faster initial render. It means that you're pushing data from the server instead of getting the JavaScript, starting the app, and then going to the data, then going to the server for the data. Mm-hmm. But we can't do that yet. So for right now, this is all just a blank page that magically populates when the application starts.
Okay.
But if you click over to the blog page, we can see our first remote function.
Okay, so I think I need to install the Svelte extension because I don't think I've run it in this one yet. Let me do that real quick. Svelte for
that's the one.
VS Code, yeah, okay. And we running now.
It looks like those angle brackets are a different color.
Now contains a TypeScript plugin. Enable. That looks fine. Let me open up this other page. There we go. Now we got our syntax highlighting. All right,
nice.
Back in business.
Right. Okay, so you see we have this. If you click on the blog page on the left hand side in the nav, there we go. So we actually have some data that's being pulled from the server, and we have an each loop in our component. And inside there, we're just doing await get summaries to get that data. And then we're creating some links, all pretty straightforward stuff.
Yeah.
So the new thing here is this data.remote file. If you command click on get summaries, it'll take you to where that is being defined.
Okay. So we've got our get summaries. So it's a query, it's async. It returns the post, which is what I would expect. We've got our post hard-coded up here.
Yep.
Okay.
For demo purposes, hard-coded data is fine.
Yeah, easy. So we have get summaries that is running, and this query looks like it's coming out of the. I'm assuming is this a shortcut to the compiler, or is this like a shortcut in the file system? So
$app is a set of generated modules that are specific to your application. So anything that, like the stuff that comes from your own configuration, stuff that is to do with the routes that you have in your app, that's all under this $app namespace, which is distinguished from just like regular whatever helper functions that you can import from the framework itself. And what's interesting about $app/server is that you cannot import anything inside that, from that module into any code that could run in the client, because the server is where you have all of your secrets. It's where you have your API keys and your database credentials and whatever else. And it's really important that you don't have that inside code that that gets served to the client for obvious reasons. Right. And so in SvelteKit, we've always had this pretty strict separation. Anything that is that needs an environment variable, if you try and import it into client-side code, your build will just fail. It'll blow up. It'll say, "Please don't do this."
I really like that that's starting to happen. Where you know, because I like y'all putting this in Svelte. I've seen it in Astro as well. You can kind of say like, this is server stuff, this is client stuff. If you define your environment variables, it'll like only let you import the ones that you've marked as being client side. I like that we're starting to get that way, as opposed to the old way of like, well, you gotta like prefix things and then you just got to know that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what's interesting about a file called data.remote.ts is because it has that .remote in the file name, this acts as a bridge between your server only code and the code that can run on the server or in the client. Gotcha. So when you import get summaries from data.remote.ts on the server, that's just a function. It's just the exact thing that gets returned from query. But in the browser, what you're importing is actually a thin wrapper around fetch. And that knows how to get data from your server. As far as TypeScript is concerned, like, you're just calling a function, so you get all of the type safety built in, and we can talk about validation and stuff in a moment. But what's actually happening is the framework is making a request to the backend on your behalf. Yeah. And then it's going to serialize it, and it can serialize all sorts of different things, and you can configure how the serialization happens. And then it will do some caching and all of that stuff automatically on your behalf. But as far as you, the developer, are concerned, you're just writing some very basic logic that returns the data that the component needs.
And this is where I really get excited about the DX of this stuff, because, you know, this is what it feels like to write an API when you control the API layer, and the client layer is like, well, I'm writing my API function, and then I hit my API endpoint, and it just feels nice. I did the thing that I needed to do in this file, and then I got the thing that I needed from this file over here in this file, and now I get to show my stuff. But as you mentioned, you have to get into caching. You have to get into all of these complicated things to make sure that you don't accidentally, you know, rate limit yourself, or grind your app to a halt, or add these, you know, these promise chains that end up accidentally blocking your page for 10 seconds while it waits for everything to load. Just little stuff that again, it's not all hard to solve once you know that it's there, but it really sucks to learn these lessons in production, especially when you're dealing with multiple teams, when you're dealing with huge apps, when you're dealing with, you know, a lot of complexity in the stuff that you're getting. So just knowing that it's just going to work. Yeah. Like, I know that you've made good default decisions, and I don't have to worry that I've like accidentally created a trap for myself in the future.
And because this is all just functions, like if you right click on get summaries and do find all references, you can find which components in your app are using that. Oh, I guess that didn't work for whatever hellish TypeScript reason.
There's so many reasons that I have broken all of my, yeah. Like, I have everything installed on everything now, so it's probably my fault.
Well, it works on my machine, Jason.
Good. And it'll probably work on your machine. Don't use my machine as a reference for anything, because it is a hot burning pile of garbage. But so we've got get summaries here, and then if we come over into the blog here, we do get back the TypeScript, right? We can see that we're getting back a slug and a title, and the slug and title are showing up in here. Like, we're in, this is great. This is exactly what I want it to be, right?
Now, what I want you to do now is go back to the browser tab and then open the developer tool so you can see the network requests that are being made.
Okay, let's get the network going. All right.
And now click into, maybe you want to clear it so that we can actually see what's happening next. And then if you click on one of those links, if you scroll down the page, you'll see that those summaries are actually still on the page, but they're being rendered by a different component.
Okay.
So
Okay.
this page also depends on get summaries, just as the prior page did. But because we went straight from a page that had it to another page that had it, and because we didn't tell the framework that that data had changed in the meantime, it was like, you know what, I'm just going to reuse the data that I already have. It's still good. And so because of that, all that we need to get to render this page is that bit of data that you're looking at, instead of getting the entire page, like all of the HTML and like all of that crap.
It's really nice. And so how under the hood, you're just sort of saying like, this is the data that was requested. And if the queries match within a certain, I assume there's some kind of default timeout. If the queries match within what time reference, then get the same thing. It's
not a timeout exactly. It's a micro task. So if you go from, this is the great thing about having the data fetching integrated into the rendering framework, is that we have the ability to know which queries are currently being actively rendered on screen. And so we can say that if a query is rendered in multiple places and it has the same arguments, then it's the same data. And so we don't need to do any network requests at all. We can just like keep using the same thing. If you were to navigate to the home page and then back to the blog page or to an individual blog post, at that point we would get the data again, because it's a query and like it might have changed in the meantime.
Sure.
But if you're keeping the same piece of data on the screen consistently, then there's no reason to go back to the network for it, unless it gets invalidated. And maybe that's the next thing we should talk about.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm into it. I think this makes a lot of sense. Where do you want to go next?
Let's try logging in and creating a post.
Okay.
So if you close out the dev tool so that we can see more of the screen. And then just type your name. This is a very crude login system. Right, you're now logged in as Jason.
Like setting a cookie, basically.
Yeah, and you can look at the logic for that. It's in a file called authremote.ts.
Okay, so we grab the name. We set a cookie called user, and then we redirect. We've got a logout to remove the cookie. Get user. Where's our get user? It's from auth server. Okay. And it looks like I'm assuming that just loads the cookie.
It does. So inside get user, we are accessing the current event, the current request context with this get request event function. And this is something that you can use inside any query or form action or whatever it is. You can get details about the request that's currently happening, including what cookies the user has. And it uses async local storage on the server, so you don't need to like pass the context around, which is really awkward. And because inside one of these functions, you can throw a redirect or throw an error, it makes it really easy to build these sort of composable primitives for ensuring that you always have a logged in user, or guarding a particular route as requiring you to be logged in. Like, and if you will get either an error or you'll get redirected to the login page if you're not, and things like that.
Nice.
So that's get user. And that's a server module. So we can use that inside any remote module, but it's not something that you can use directly from the client because it requires cookies.
Got it. Yep. Makes sense.
So in authremote.ts, we have these two forms. And if you were to do the Command-Shift-G thing on the logout button, you would see where we're actually using
Command-Shift-G on the logout.
You can see that we're taking that form, that logout form, and we're spreading it onto a form element. So that gives you the form method equals post, the action, which is the generated URL that sends the data to the server.
I don't think I've ever seen this approach before, and I think this is very cool.
Yeah, and what's really neat about this is if we had server-side rendering, which we don't, but if we did, then this would all work without JavaScript because it's just a regular form. But because we do have JavaScript, we can progressively enhance that form submission. We can go to the server, get the updated data for the page without you having to reload the page and without you having to configure any progressive enhancement logic. It's all just kind of there for free. You can customize what happens in a progressively enhanced form submission, but like we probably don't need to get into that. It all just kind of does the right thing on your behalf.
That's slick. I like that kind of API. Because that's, I mean, I care a lot about making sure that things don't work when the JavaScript turns off. But knowing that, cause you know, I think everybody's kind of getting into this like form actions vibe where you can write a form and then you sort of submit it to their action. And so this isn't a like completely unique feature, but I love the idea of it sort of deciding if it needs to be a post or a get or whatever, and just kind of handling that stuff, because I don't particularly care if it's a get or a put or a post. I just want it to do the thing when I submit the form. So this is nice. Exactly. And just going back to that again, it was we just imported this logout function and spread it right into the form component, and that does the whole thing. I like that. That's very cool.
Yeah, and because it's calling that await me query there, if you log out, that query is going to get invalidated, and so it will then show the login page. And if you go to the blog index page before doing that, okay, you'll see at the bottom now, because you're logged in, you have the ability to create a new post. If you were to click the logout button, that would just disappear, because both places on the screen where we're using await me,
and so it doesn't have to do a full page refresh.
Exactly.
Slick, very slick. Okay. So now that I'm logged in, I go in here, I can create a new post, and my post.
I had a suspicion this would happen.
That's good. I was chasing it to the route.
Yeah.
And it is there now. So it looks like it didn't like do the form switch over, but it did everything else.
The redirect part failed. Yeah. So clearly this isn't quite production ready yet, but you get the idea.
This is cool though. Okay. So then in here, we've talked about how do we, and this handles auth, right? So somebody was asking about auth earlier. And so the auth is handled through these like remote functions, and through being able to touch the cookies in the GET request event. We've got the invalidation being client side and instant, which is really cool, because I literally just was fighting with that in Astro, because I had people logged in and like my logout was too fast. So the cookies weren't gone yet. And so they looked logged in until they refreshed the page. So I had to manually add a timeout to make sure that everything was gone, so that when they saw the next page, it would actually be logged out looking, even though they were logged out no matter what. And so that is like one less thing that I have to think about. It's just a nice way to approach this problem. So we're loading data. We've got the proof that like when we do the async await, it's not blocking. Those are all kind of working, and it's coordinating where data that's affected by the awaited promise isn't updated until all the promises related to it are complete. So we're solving a lot of the UI problems. What else do you want to dig into here?
So I think the thing that I'm excited about, I mean, there's a bunch of things that I'm excited about, but the ability to be a little bit more intentional about where you put all of your logic. So the way that it works today is you need to get the data at a special root component, essentially, because those are the hooks that the framework has to give you your stuff. You have to receive it inside a plus page.svelte file, and then if you need to pass it to another component, then you receive it as a prop, and then you pass it as a prop to another component. And that kind of sucks. And so if you look at this page, you have this await get summaries, and then you have the create new post beneath it. If you go on the blog/slug page, or rather the blog/slug/layout, I forget exactly where it is, but you can see the other place where we're using get summaries. So I guess it's in the adjacent layout page.
Here we go.
There we go. So you can see down here, we've got essentially identical markup. We've got a UL with await get summaries, and then beneath it, we have if await me, then create new post. And today with loaders, like you can move that into another function, but then you got to like pass your data around. It's kind of annoying. But now you can just like copy that code, yoink it out, put it in a new component, and then use it in as many places as it's relevant.
So if I take this, I go out into I've got my roots. Let me make
call it like summaries, and you can put it wherever. You can put it like inside the blog directory or something like that.
Boy, components, and I can just call it summaries.ts. There's no like component naming.
.svelte.
Oh, .svelte. I knew that.
Yeah.
Okay, and so then if I remember how to write it, oh God, it's been this. I'm about to humiliate myself here. We do a script up at the top, and then we have the component at the bottom is how that works. So we have our script, which is going to need the get.
You can just like paste it straight in, I think, and then just paste the stuff that you copied.
Paste that stuff in directly.
And then if you just like do the quick fix thing, it should know how to import them.
You should wait. What are you mad about? Cannot find name get summaries. You're right here. What have I done?
Interesting. I don't know why that's happening.
Log data remote.
One thing we could try is put the summaries.svelte file inside the blog directory.
Inside the blog directory. Okay.
Yeah, instead of having a source/components.
Okay, and then it.
Okay, it seems to like that. I'm not sure why.
It's happy about that. I mean, who knows? And we got our auth remote, and it did the lib thing for that.
Yeah.
Okay, and so now that just works, and then so I can come back over to our blog slug, and I want this instead to be our.
Yeah, just start typing capital S summaries. Is it gonna? There it is. It's got it.
And then I can take this and I can do the same thing on the
page.svelte.
Page.svelte.
Yeah.
Here. And that's going to take all of this. And now we have. Get rid of these imports. Oh, and we can get rid of the imports on here too, because we're not using them anymore. So we've now simplified this site. And it continues to function exactly as it did before, and I didn't have to mess around with data. I just got to like move the data where I wanted it to be.
Exactly. And the React people watching this are like, oh, so what? We can do that with server components. But this isn't a server component. Like you can still use state, you can still use everything. It's one unified, consistent mental model from front to back. You don't have to understand the rules of composition. Like it's all just contained in the way that you would expect. But without those limits.
Well, and like I think one of the things that gets me when I get into React world is that a lot of times I've got something that's coming in async, and I don't necessarily want to re-render the page. I just want to update like one little thing, and I end up in these sort of like, okay, so this would be a server component, but then I need an effect to do a thing there, and then in order to get the effect to not re-render, I'm getting into refs now, and then I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I feel like I'm wrestling with the rules of a puzzle game as opposed to building a website. And I think that's been one of my big challenges as React has sort of adapted. Yeah, and it's I think they're adapting to a mental model that I think they've got a vision that's gonna. I think with the React compiler, a lot of that trouble goes away and stuff like that. But I keep feeling like I'm not writing websites anymore. I'm like writing React, and that to me feels at odds with my personal values as a developer. Like I want to be building for the web, and the harder it is for me to do webby things, the more I get frustrated with the thing that I'm building. And what I like about what I'm seeing here is that everything happening here feels like it's a component, it's some markup. I'm putting it here. If I want to make a request, like if I was in vanilla JavaScript, this is what I would make a script tag and I would load some stuff. And then I have some bonuses like being able to template, but I feel like I'm doing webby stuff, right? Which feels like what I'm after. It's one of the big reasons I'm a big Astro fan, is it feels like doing webby stuff. And I like that we're finding ways to kind of simplify, like remove the frameworks and make them feel more like we're just using what the browsers are offering us now that all these APIs are catching up and getting so powerful.
Yeah, we're trying to stay out of your way, ultimately.
I very much appreciate that. Let's see. I think we might have a couple questions here. So you need to have an auth function on all remotes that you need. Can't you determine which folder needs to pass through hooks or something like that? Do you mean I think you would have the auth function to determine whether or not somebody's logged in, right? Like you don't need
Yeah,
it
I mean,
unless
you can make a higher order function and use that inside your query call that enforces that a user exists on your behalf. But doing things at like the folder level, it's not a good idea. And part of the framework's responsibility is steering people away from bad ideas, because what's going to happen is you're going to have some logic that isn't in the right folder, or the folder is going to get misconfigured. And one day you're going to have a vulnerability because a file got innocently moved to the wrong place and it no longer matched whatever like convention you had set up. And all of a sudden it's going to break down. What we want is to have code that you can trace back to the source. Like inside the query, you can see, because of the code that is used for that query, what its dependencies are, what its requirements are. And you want to be able to trace those function calls back to where they are to see how they're defined. As soon as you start having magical configuration and convention and stuff, then that's when your app becomes a spaghetti mess. And so we're not doing that.
So a couple related questions. Can a remote function return a Svelte component?
No, it cannot. But
it's going to return data, and you're going to build your components out of that data.
Exactly. One of the examples that I shared with you just before we started, like I think it's number 4, is the ability to lazily import components. So there's a lot of different things that you can do with the ability to await stuff inside a component. It's not just about data loading. It's also about delegating work to a web worker. It's about lazily importing components. It's about preloading images and all of these other things. So that is generally the way that you would approach that problem of conditionally loading a component, is you just await import right there inside the component.
Nice. And then a related question is, what about a promise rejection?
Great question. Svelte has something called error boundaries. And if you have a boundary that contains some UI or an error handler, then anything that happens inside that boundary, including promise rejections, will trigger that boundary. If you go into the layout.svelte here, the root layout, you'll actually see one of these boundaries.
Here.
Okay, so snippet pending is empty. This is what would show while the code is first loading. Ultimately, we want to get rid of that. We want you to be able to just start using await directly inside your application, and it, like the asynchronous server-side rendering, will block until the promises have awaited and send up the result along with the data. But for now, we have to have a snippet pending so that you can use await. But then right below it is this failed snippet. And this is what gets shown if an error occurs during rendering inside this boundary, whether it's an asynchronous or synchronous error. And so the error argument is what got thrown, and the reset callback is what you can call to try and reset the state once you've fixed whatever the error was, if it's possible to do so.
And so if I fake this by, let's say, going to, where was our...
Yeah, in like data.remote, you could throw inside get summaries or something like that. Fingers crossed this bit it works and isn't buggy.
We'll just say like unknown, and then something's going to explode, and we come back out here, and we go home, go to blog, and it shows.
So it's
there's
not
our error boundary.
Telling you unknown, it's telling you internal error, and that's very important, because if an error occurs on the server, you don't know where it's coming from. It could be coming from a library. It could be doing something that, like, candidly, you don't want your users to see. First of all, they can't do anything about it. Second of all, it might be providing information to attackers, like your stack trace and so on, could give them information that's useful to you. So if you want to control the error message, then instead of just throwing, you want to use the error helper from SvelteKit itself. So if you replace throw new error with a lowercase error, but you don't need to throw it, it throws itself.
Oh, got it. Okay, so we just do like error.
Yeah, and then the first argument should be a status code, an HTTP status code. So
okay, so we'll do like a 500.
Yeah.
And then this is like
Exactly.
That'll be actually showed out here. Okay, so you do have the ability to send a helpful message, but you have to opt into exposing things to the user.
Exactly.
That's I mean, another thing that I don't really think about very often is the ways that we inadvertently leak stuff and make it, because if you go hammer on my website, I'm sure you can find a way to make it 500, and I'm definitely just throwing whatever error. And it's definitely showing you whatever's under the hood.
I mean, there, but for the grace of God, like it's impossible to remember to keep all of these things straight. And
right.
the framework's job is to try and keep you on track. There's another important example of this, in fact, which maybe we can look at. If you go back to data.remote and look at the get post function.
Data.remote get post. Here we go.
Right. So that first argument, that v.string, that is a validator. V is valibot, and v.string is a standard schema validator. Standard schema is this thing that Zod and valibot and all of these other libraries adhere to, which checks that the incoming data is what you expect it to be. And once we've done that, we're able to type slug inside the function. And that's really important because these remote functions, they're not just private implementation details of your application. For it to work, we actually need to create a publicly accessible endpoint. And as soon as you create a publicly accessible endpoint, people are going to start throwing random data at it. And so it's very important.
As a clarification point, is this, so if I throw in a valibot schema here, and I assume it can be any schema, I can do a big custom gnarly one and accept like a really complex object. Is it throwing if it doesn't match the schema? Is it coercing? Like, so if I put this in and I type it as a string, but then what I send in is I don't know, some JavaScript code, does it just wrap that in some quotes and say like, this is my JavaScript code? Or is it like, you didn't send me a string, this is no good?
If you don't send it a string, it will respond with a 400 error and a message that says bad request.
Right.
It's not, by default, it's not going to tell you what the nature of the error was, because if this error is happening in your app, it's probably because you're under attack. Like someone is trying to find the velociraptors in the electric cage, like trying to probe for weak spots. And we don't want to give attackers a map of our defenses. But you can customize that. There is a hook that you can add called handle validation error. Details are unimportant, but you can say, okay, here are the issues. This is the message that I want to craft in response to that. But the default is the error will just fail with a 400 status code, and it won't get into your app. So you're not going to, concoct a database query using a value that doesn't match the types that you expect, which in some circumstances can result in people having access to data that they shouldn't have access to. So it's a little bit annoying, honestly, having to validate your stuff. Like it feels like a bit nannyish, but this is the sort of thing that is going to keep your sysops people from.
And I feel like I was initially resistant to typing, like building schemas, and then the projects I work in all use Zod, and so I got like really into a nice well-defined Zod schema and being able to just schema.parse everything that comes through to know like, oh yeah, no, that API response is definitely different than it used to be because it just broke all of our schemas, and now we know, right? It's like David Khorshid of XState always says you should make the impossible, like make impossible states impossible, right? Like if you don't make something explicit, you are implicitly trusting that the program will always work. And schema validation is one of those things. You're just trusting that you always get the right kind of data. And in a lot of cases that doesn't matter, if it's like a single, like a search query or whatever, like people type whatever they want and who cares. But if you're accepting form input, you're accepting data, and somebody accidentally formats it incorrectly, it's not helpful to you as the developer to just get like a random failure, and it's not helpful to the user to get a random failure. But if you have that schema validation in place, it immediately knows why it failed. Oh, you didn't set this as an array, you set it as an object. Instant fix that would have taken me forever to read by eye, right? It's little stuff like that. So I'm very sold on taking the little bit of time up front to solve these problems.
Yeah, me too.
There's one more corollary question before we move on from this. Can I also put a schema into form to validate the form data input? Or would that just be like a manual thing here?
So for forms, like the form data object is inherently a little bit hostile to
Yeah.
TypeScript,
Yes.
as many people have discovered. And there's really nothing that we can do outside this function to validate the data inside the form data, because like we know that it's going to be a form data object. If somehow a request comes in that is not a form submission, then like we don't even get to the point of calling this. But then inside there, you have the ability to interact with the data however you want. And at this point, this is where typically you actually don't want to throw immediately, because if inside a form function, if the data doesn't match your expectations, it's probably a legitimate validation error. Like someone mistyped their email address and it's no longer a valid email. Well, at that point, if you fail validation, you want to send the submitted data back in case it's a full page reload that's going to happen, so that you can repopulate the form controls, give them a human readable error message, and let them fix the error and try again.
Got it.
So I don't know, there may be some helpers that we can add to make that process a little bit more seamless and idiomatic. Not totally sure what that looks like yet, but it's something that's like pretty easy to solve in userland. So we're kind of punting on it for now.
Yeah, I mean, my way of solving this is to like put the Zod schema here instead of this,
and just like
absolutely pull out my data, parse it real quick, and then I make a decision on what I'm going to do next. So okay, so you were about to say something before I jumped into that question.
Yeah, there's one last thing in this demo app that I think is worth talking about, and that's optimistic updates. Okay. In the same way that we have the ability to do form submissions using remote functions, we can do things that are not forms using something called commands. So if you go back to the app and then click on the button page, we can see this.
Go back to the app. Button. Nice.
Okay.
I don't know if I've got my sound pipe through, but it's doing a squeaky bike horn.
Yeah, it does have a squeaky bike horn. I've been amusing myself a lot with that this week. Every so often, my wife will be like, "What was that?" It's because I'm just spamming the button. You probably noticed as you were clicking it that it was a little bit slow.
Yeah, here I'll. Oh, it comes out of this here, does it? Did that come through? I don't know if that's coming through, but
so you press it and the number updates about a second later. So
yes,
let's investigate. If you bring open the network tab again, then we can start to understand what's going on.
Okay, we got the network tab here. I'm going to refresh the page. Clear this and then increment clicks, and then it runs the get me and the get clicks. And let's see. Looks like is there just a timeout on here on one of these?
Yeah, so it's the first thing to notice is that they're making 3 separate requests for one button click. If you do the Command-Shift-G thing, click on the button, then we can start to understand what's happening here.
All right, here we go. We're on the button. It calls honk. Very, very apropos for your shirt.
Okay, so the await get clicks indicates that this is coming from another remote function. It's another query. Increment clicks is a new type of remote function that we haven't seen so far called a command.
Okay.
And if you just command click on increment clicks to see how that's implemented, you can see that some numpty left and await sleep in there.
Got it.
We'll leave that in for now because I want to show you a useful thing that you can do inside this command. If you add a new line below line 13 and just do await get clicks and then call it and then dot refresh.
Oh God. Oh God.
What's going on with your editor?
It was working. It was working. And then I hit the wrong button. I'm assuming that's function call.
Yep.
Okay.
And then if you click the button again, you'll you'll see that it's no longer making multiple requests.
Yep.
Oh, embarrassingly, it seems like I must have broken something because you're not getting the updated data. So let's...
And we don't need, do we need to like pass something through here?
Honestly, I don't know. I think this is just a bug, but it's okay. What this was designed to show is that inside the command, you can specify which queries are updated. If you don't specify any queries, then it's just going to assume that we probably need to update everything. Like to be safe, for example, in the case of a logout command, we want to make sure that the user isn't still seeing stuff that they don't have access to. So we just invalidate all of the queries. But if you specify, oh, this refreshes get clicks, then it's not going to do that. Unfortunately, this part of the demo didn't work, but it's okay because we can delete that line of code. We don't need it anymore. And go back into the client. And this time we're going to edit the click handler, that honk function.
Okay. So back to the honk function. I'm just going to take my shortcut here. Honk.
Okay. So increment clicks parentheses dot updates. And then inside that, open the parentheses and then just do call get clicks again.
Like that.
And then hit save. Okay, so it's working this time. And it's doing all that in a single request. If you click on increment clicks in the network tab, you can see that the data that it's sending back includes this refreshes object. So it's actually the framework has said to the server, I want you to run this increment clicks function. And then before you send the data back, I want you to also refresh the queries that I've specified in my updates method. So that way we don't need to get the user data anymore. We're not calling that me function. And more importantly, we're not running the command, waiting for the data to get back, and then running the query again to see if it's changed.
Right.
But we don't stop there because the chances are if you're clicking a button that increments things, you kind of know in advance what the next state is going to be. We don't really need to wait for the server for that information. So inside that increment clicks updates call, after get clicks, we're going to do dot with override. And then we're going to pass in a function that takes the current value and returns the next value.
Okay.
So
and
just do n and then return n plus 1, for example.
Okay. And so this is our optimistic update.
Yeah.
Okay. So now what should happen is when I click, and so we'll watch here, we click, and it's instant. Except I broke it. Does it need to be reactive or something?
It's a very good question. It worked for me this morning. So I don't know. It seems like a you problem.
Oh, wait, now it's working. I think maybe because I needed to refresh the page. So, but now it's working. So as
there's definitely some kinks here, but yes, it basically works.
It's instant, and you can see the requests actually coming in. Watch the network tab. So click network tab. So it's that optimistic refresh is definitely working there. That's great.
And if that command were to fail, there's a network error or whatever it is, it will automatically roll back the override that you applied.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Very cool. People are asking if we can go deep on signals. Ryan's here.
When we're designing this stuff, the first version of the design didn't have single flight mutations, and we were like, is that a problem? I mean, it's probably not, because like a lot of the time you actually don't know what data is going to be needed for the next thing, so there's a risk of overfetching if you do a single flight mutation. But you know what, if we don't have single flight mutations, Ryan's going to kill us. Like he's just going to murder us on his stream. So we iterated until we found a design that we like.
Carney auto-driven development. I get it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's been the story of front end for the last couple of years, right?
Indeed. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes left. So chat, now's your chance. If you've got questions, please do throw them out. something more specific than go deep on signals because we don't have that kind of time. Rich, is there anything else you want to show with the last few minutes here?
Not show so much. I mean, if you want to look at the other playground demos, then we can. But
let's pull it. We got them, so let's pull them up. We'll peek at them while they're here. And so let's see. We looked at this one. This is the awaits not blocking the fast update and also running in parallel, which is really cool. What's happening with this one?
Oh, okay. So this one, we're getting some data from an API, and if you like in that input, type food or something like that. And you may have noticed that you actually have 4 separate requests there. The data.
Oh yeah.
You got the results for F, and then for FO, and then for FO, and then for FOD, which a lot of the time isn't what you want. You could debounce, but that's kind of sucky because then you're delaying getting the data that you want.
Right.
So this is just to demonstrate the fact that you can use an abort signal to disregard any stale data when you trigger additional work. So if you uncomment that, we're now calling fetch with an abort signal that automatically gets rid of any stale data.
Nice.
So you,
okay.
You don't need to create the abort controller yourself. You don't need to control when it gets run, all of that stuff. The framework just does it for you, which
that's really handy, because abort signals are one of those things that I keep realizing I should be using and I'm definitely not.
Right.
And so I would love it if somebody just learned them for me so that I don't have to go super deep on them. All right. So now we've got our, now we're onto the third one here. This is an is prime checker.
Yeah, this is really just to show that it's not just about data. Being able to defer expensive computation to a web worker in a really idiomatic way is pretty useful. So if you're computing whether a very large number is prime, you probably don't want to do that on the main thread. So you can just change that. And again, because of the
I hope you're not expecting me to know a very large prime number off the top of my head.
I mean, let's do 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, I think is what I found recently. It turns out it's actually not that expensive to compute. But
once you get into like the 12-digit ones or whatever, yeah.
So that's something that I would love to see more people using web workers for this sort of thing, and it's really easy now.
Got it. Okay, yeah. So this is literally just this is the computation I would do, but by wrapping it in worker, you're moving it off the main thread.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't part of the framework. This is just like that function is down below is literally all that's powering this. Just a little trick for creating workers out of a stringified function.
Yeah. Very cool. Okay, so yeah, so a way to just like parallelize things that's really nice. Okay, let's see. We looked at this one. This is lazily loading components based on derived data, which is pretty dang cool. And this is the sort of thing that I have historically just avoided entirely, because any of the await import stuff just introduces so much hassle that I just give up, right? So seeing this in a demo where it's like, wait a minute, this is in derived data, which means that this has to update, then this has to run, then this needs to load, and then I get this, which I can then render on the page, is like, oh, all right.
Yeah, with no flickering or any of that. And those components, they can have their own asynchronous work and so on.
That's really slick. Okay, and then our fifth one here.
This is just to demonstrate that another use of await inline is inside the Pokemon.Svelte component. We're using await to fetch the data, but we're also using it in the markup to preload the source. Because a bugbear of mine is when you're using stuff on the web and like you open a different, like you click to a different tab or something, an image will appear and the image hasn't loaded yet, and that's no good.
Yes.
And we can fix that. It's really easy now to just fix that. I might even suggest that we put this into the framework directly so that you don't even need to do the await preload source. Like it's just automatic for images that don't have a loading equals lazy attribute. I think React is exploring something similar as well.
I mean, I don't think it's necessarily. I think as long as you can choose to turn it off, right? Like if as a, because there's always some weird edge case where like I need a thing to do a thing and the framework is helping and I'm like, wait, stop helping. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know if I've got a good reason that I would want the image to appear unloaded first. I don't know. I like it. It would be nice. It would just be nice, right? It's nice for that to be a good default. That feels good.
Yeah.
Let's see. Are there plans to add support for calling remote functions directly without Svelte components?
So you can call them from anywhere inside your app. It doesn't have to be from a component. You can call it inside a regular module.
Okay.
Yeah. So what you get back when you call a remote function, it depends on which remote function it is. But for a query, for example, you get back a promise, but it's also a promise with these extra bits like the with override and all these other things. But it also has like .current, which gives you the latest value, and .error, which is a value that if the promise rejects, like that gets populated, and all of this stuff. So there's a lot of ways that you can compose and combine these to do whatever it is you're trying to do. It's not just inside the markup of your component that you can use these.
And when you say so we get the details back, it's got this remote query. That's what you're talking about. That has like the kind of current and everything in it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. The follow up to that is like, can you call them as like a REST API? Like, are you exposing them as endpoints?
No, you can't. And the reason for that.
But if we wanted to, we could just create an endpoint that calls the function. So if you opt into it directly, great, but no like compiler magic to make that happen.
Exactly. You can create a server endpoint which can export a get handler, and then inside that, like you need to deserialize the arguments yourself from await request.json and like figure out how to handle that. You can pass it to the remote function, which on the server is just a direct function call. And then you can return a JSONified version of that value. So if you want to expose an API, it's super easy to do so. Maybe we'll create some helpers around doing that, but it's we don't want to expose the remote functions directly.
Yeah, and also like when you start thinking about how you want the API to work, like I can see that being extremely complex to automate. Whereas if you're wrapping it, the things that you would need, like checking for specific cookies, or if you want to like unwrap the bearer token, or you want to verify the request, or all these things that people do with REST calls, that would be very hard to like build into a compiler automated thing, because everybody's process is different. Whereas if I'm importing a server function, doing my company's like how to verify a REST call thing, and then calling the remote function, that's very straightforward. So yeah, I think I'm on board with keeping it simple like that. But okay, so we are effectively out of time here. I wanted to just say thank you again for taking some time with us today. Really excited about everything you're working on here. Every time I see Svelte, it looks better and better. And I'm very excited to see how all of this lands once I mean, I know because you're in like super alpha on this, right?
We are. There's a whole roadmap ahead of us. And this is just like the foundation layer. Once we have that in place, we can start to get a little bit more ambitious about like, do we start to have things that are built in for internationalization and auth and storage and all of these things that we can build on top of these primitives. I think that's where things get really exciting. For now, we are focusing on building the best possible foundation for all of this stuff. And I'm really stoked with what the team has been able to achieve so far. And I'm really excited to see where it goes from here.
Yeah, I can't wait. People in the chat are very excited. If folks want to follow along, like keep up on the roadmap, what's coming, where they can, opt into experimental flags and stuff, what's the best place for them to go to do that?
So our Discord is where a lot of stuff gets announced and where the Svelte community hangs out. Svelte.dev/chat. It will take you direct to our Discord server. Most of the actual discussion around new features, RFCs, issues, pull requests, that all happens through GitHub on svelte.js/Svelte repo. And people should also follow Svelte on Blue Sky, at svelte.dev on Blue Sky, and also sveltesociety.dev on Blue Sky, which shares a lot of updates. Have weekly hangouts on YouTube, meetups around the globe, all that sort of thing. So there's a whole bunch of places where people can keep in touch with what we're doing. We also have a blog with an RSS feed, but we don't update it nearly as frequently as we should.
I know that feeling. I just spent all this time building an RSS feed because I realized mine was broken and I have not published a single thing since.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Rich, thank you so much. I threw a link to Rich's Blue Sky into the chat as well. If you are not following these links. You can always go find them in the Code TV Discord. As always, please like the video, leave a comment, subscribe, share it with people, talk about it, because that helps YouTube recognize that people are enjoying themselves and that more people should see it. Rich, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Super excited to see where the rest of the project goes. Chat, thank you all for hanging out. Thanks again to Amanda from White Coat Captioning for doing the live captions today. And we will see you all next time.